The Dodgers won a crazy Game 7 to take their second straight title, but the Blue Jays showed that that team could have been beaten.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. Been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. Well, I just watched the craziest baseball game I think I've ever watched, although there was another one earlier in this series that went 18 innings. But for a Game 7 to go back and forth, and for the Dodgers to somehow prove they were inevitable, even though the Blue Jays had every chance to win that World Series. What an incredible game. And this is my platform here with Locked On Mets, so I want to talk about it, but also we will bring this into a Mets lens as we go through the show. First and foremost, for those of you who missed it, the Dodgers used all of their starting pitchers in this game. It was incredible how they were able to get around what was clearly an Achilles heel for them going to the playoffs, which was their lack of trusted relievers. Didn't matter for them. They still win the World Series. Shohei Ohtani starts on 3 days rest. I think part of that was because there is a rule, the Ohtani rule, that if your starting pitcher elects to be the DH, i.e. Shohei Ohtani, they can stay the game after they're pulled as a starting pitcher. But if he came in relief, they would have had to pull him from the game whenever they subbed him out as far as to get in a new arm. So he opens up the game on 3 days rest. Looks okay, but ends up giving up a 3-run homer to Bo Bichette, which gave the Blue Jays a fairly comfortable lead, as comfortable as a lead can be in Game 7 of the World Series. The Dodgers grabbed the run back in the 4th inning off of Max Scherzer, who had a pretty awesome playoff run, went 4 1/3, gave up just that 1 run on the sacrifice fly, and he was only at like 50-something pitches when they pulled him. So Scherzer really did show up at 41 years old, however old Scherzer is at this point. The Dodgers scratched another run in the 6th inning on a sac fly, but the Blue Jays would answer back as Andres Jimenez hit an RBI double in the bottom half of the 6th. Trailing 4-2, Max Muncy homers in the 8th. Then in the 9th inning, with the Dodgers down to their final 2 outs and Shohei Ohtani standing on deck, the thought was, you can't walk Miguel Rojas, right? Well, they gave him a pitch to hit, and Miguel Rojas hits one of the more improbable home runs you are ever going to see, as shades of Rajay Davis in the 2016 World Series, although the then Cleveland Indians did not win that game after Rajay Davis's majestic home run. Same thing here with Miguel Rojas, big-time home run that sends the game to extras, although the Blue Jays had their chance in the bottom of the 9th inning. They had a lot of chances in this series in Game 6 and Game 7. Like I said, every Dodger starter threw in this game. Ohtani opened it up. You had Justin Robleski, who relieved him. Emmett Sheehan. Actually, excuse me. It was Ohtani. Glasnow pitched after Justin Robleski. And then you had Emmett Sheehan. Glasnow went 2 1/3. Sheehan threw an inning. Blake Snell comes in the 8th after Sheehan gave up a leadoff double. Snell got through that 8th inning, was able to strand that runner, but he gives up a single and a walk in the 9th inning after Vladdy opened up the inning, hitting a fly ball that off the bat I thought was going to be a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. walk-off home run that would have sent an entire nation into a frenzy, but it did not have the legs and ended up falling actually just short of the warning track. But Snell, he ends up coming out of the game after giving up a single and a walk. So Yoshinobu Yamamoto comes in. Yamamoto pitched Game 6 through 96 pitches on no day's rest. He actually comes out there and he throws, and he ends up hitting a batter to load the bases. So the Blue Jays, bases juiced, 1 out, tie ball game. A walk wins it, a pass ball wins it, a base hit wins it, a sac fly wins it. What doesn't win it is a ground ball hit to Miguel Rojas, who hit the huge home run. He stumbles, but still delivers a strike home. For a second, I thought this World Series was going to end on a replay review because Will Smith's foot comes off the plate and goes back down. And luckily for the Dodgers, it came down just barely ahead of I don't remember who the runner was, but the runner sliding into home. And then you get another near crazy end to a World Series as I can't remember who hit it, but the guy gives one a ride, and Andy Pages collides with Kike Hernandez and catches it. They actually put Pages in the game when Yamamoto came into the game. Actually, they put him in when the bases were loaded in the ninth inning to just get a better arm in center field. If that's Tommy Edman, maybe the World Series doesn't end. Or maybe that World Series, does end on that play. But instead, Pages makes the catch. That sends it to extras. Yamamoto, a 1-2-3 bottom of the 10th inning again on no day's rest after throwing 96 pitches the day before. Don't you wish the Mets got Yoshinobu Yamamoto? Could have been a completely different franchise or whatever. Who knows how things would have gone different for the New York Mets if they were able to land Yamamoto after the 2023 season. You never know. Maybe the Mets have a World Series win at this point. Yamamoto in the 11th inning, after Will Smith breaks the tie with a solo homer, he gives up a leadoff double to Vladdy, who was just unbelievable all playoffs long. He's bunted over to third base. So you have the tying run at third. Yamamoto walks Addison Barger, and Alejandro Kirk comes up, which is a pitcher's dream in the sense that he can give you that double play ball you need to win the World Series. And that's exactly what Yamamoto got. They had Roki Sasaki up in the bullpen. They had Clayton Kershaw up in the bullpen, but Dave Roberts stuck with Yamamoto, and Yamamoto delivers. Ground ball hit to Mookie Betts, 6-6-3 double play to Freddie Freeman, and the Dodgers win the World Series. It's unbelievable what Yoshinobu Yamamoto just did in that World Series. You might not ever see a performance like that again. First time since Randy Johnson that a pitcher has won 3 games in a World Series. He had a complete game victory. He wins game 6, and he wins game 7. Unbelievable. 17-2 third innings pitch, 1.02 ERA, gave up 2 runs on 10 hits and 2 walks, struck out 15, 0.68 whip. Just insane stuff. Rightfully got the World Series MVP. But a gut-wrenching loss for the Toronto Blue Jays, who had so many chances to win the World Series. And they just couldn't pull it off. But they did show that this Dodgers team who rolled over the Brewers, that everybody thought was unbeatable, the team that I know I did a show after the Dodgers won that game and just talked about this gap between the Dodgers and everybody else. The Blue Jays proved if you build a good team, and not just a good team on paper, a good collective unit, a team that pulls for each other, that plays for each other, that plays their hearts out, and they did. You can beat any team, regardless of the starting pitchers they're going to line up and everything else. You can beat any team. You don't have to have the most talented 26-man roster. You just have to find the winning combination. The Blue Jays did that, but they still came up a little bit short. I want to talk about what can be learned from the team that the Blue Jays put together this year. So we're going to go through that here in just a minute. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you could turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, it's easy. Honestly, it's my favorite way to follow along with not just football, because you have football and you got basketball. You could play both in the same lineup with Prize Picks. Take whatever basketball player you like, look at their projections, look at the NFL lineup, and you can build your own fantasy lineup. And if even one pick doesn't hit, Prize Picks invented Flex Play, so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. I would love to get there by the end of the year. We're within 200. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, looking at this Blue Jays team, it really is amazing what they were able to put together, because if you just, at the beginning of the postseason, looked at the lineup and you hadn't watched the Toronto Blue Jays all season, because they had an incredible regular season to win the AL East. But if you just looked and said, all right, well, Bo Bichette's out, so they got Andres Jimenez at short. Okay, Ernie Clement. Who's Ernie Clement? Dalton Varsho's a good defensive center fielder. Alejandro Kirk. Okay, they got Nathan Lukes, and they got George Springer had a great season, but they got Springer and Vladdy, and who else? And then you look at the rotation, and who's this Trey Savage guy, their rookie? It all came together for the Blue Jays, and they were able to piece everything together throughout this postseason. But really, it starts with the fact that they had a great regular season. They had a good team that built a great clubhouse, and that's what you need. We saw last year the Mets didn't have enough pitching, but they were able to push the Dodgers because they were a great team. If you really look at the 2024 Mets on paper, now the pitching discrepancy, just the fact that everything fell apart for the 2025 Mets. But if you just looked at the rosters, the 2025 roster for the New York Mets was better. They had Juan Soto, but they weren't as good of a team. It makes you wonder, should the Mets just say, screw it, let's trade Jeff McNeil, let's trade Luis Angel Acuna, and let's sign Jose Iglesias to just give us those clubhouse vibes and be our utility infielder, because he's going to do stuff within the margins of just making that clubhouse work. Not that many people want to take what Eric Chavez has to say, because he's not very popular amongst Mets fans, but he was in that clubhouse. And he was on the Foul Territory podcast a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned the difference of not having JD Martinez and Jose Iglesias, those guys that were real leaders for that 2024 team, and that those voices were maybe missed in 2025. So I do think, while, I did the checklist show on Friday going through what the Mets need to do this offseason, yes, they do need to bring back Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. Yes, they need an ace. Yes, they need to build a bridge to Diaz in that bullpen. But they got to figure out how to foster a really good clubhouse, how to find the right veteran pieces, to blend with the young pieces, to pick the right guys to invest playing time in, the right young players that you can count on. Because for the Blue Jays, again, Ernie Clement, Addison Barger, these guys came up so big in October. So you need that blend of veterans and young players. And again, you just have to foster a winning team, a winning culture. One thing that is breaking my brain about this Blue Jays run is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And what does that mean for the Mets and Pete Alonso? Because on one end of the spectrum, I can say the Mets need to lock up their first baseman who's hits in the middle of the lineup. But he's not Vladdy. Slugging wise, sure, but he's not the complete hitter that Vladdy is. He's older than Vladdy. So there's a couple different things there that comes into it. I could say, on one hand, lock up your homegrown guy. Lock him up. It's important to have that guy. On the other hand, I could say, did you watch Vladimir Guerrero Jr. play first base throughout the postseason? Because a guy that metrically, if you look at the defensive metrics, does not grade well, unbelievable defensively throughout the playoffs. Now, Pete Alonso, not great metrically. I think he's good around the bag. There's no way he's making the plays that Vladdy was making in the World Series and even before that throughout the playoffs. No chance. So is that something the Mets are missing? Do they need to bring Pete Alonso back to DH? And do they need to find a defensive-minded first baseman? I don't know. These are questions for David Stearns. But just watching that Blue Jays team, there was just an inherent togetherness that led them to push what was supposed to be this unbeatable, incredible Dodgers team with 4 aces going through October that just completely rolled over what was the best team in baseball during the regular season of the Brewers. And yet Toronto found it at the right time. They found the momentum. They had the right guys in that clubhouse, and they really pushed them. I mean, they really pushed the Dodgers. It's crazy to think about how they lost that World Series. I can't imagine being a Blue Jays fan today. I can't. You thought it was heartbreaking when the Mets couldn't make the playoffs this year. And yes, it was. And I think the difference, I would say, and I'm not a Blue Jays fan, so I can't entirely put myself into their mindset, but I think the difference was for the Mets to miss the playoffs, it was embarrassing. It hurt and it was embarrassing. But to lose a World Series that way has to be just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Game 6, you rally back. You got runners at second and third, nobody out in the 9th inning. Tyler Glasnow comes out of the bullpen. And you have the guy that ended up setting the record for the most hits ever in October up in Ernie Clement. But in that at bat, he pops up. And then you get the low line drive, and Addison Barger gets, back picked off second base for a double play. Kike Hernandez makes the catch. Incredible pick by Miguel Rojas at second base too, to complete that play, to get that out at second base. And they escaped that inning. And then they were able to win it. Or they escaped that inning and won it on that play. Sorry, it's been a crazy series, and a lot of these games start to blend together. They won it on that crazy double play. And then you have this World Series where they had their chances. But credit to the Dodgers, because the Dodgers never backed down. They always kept fighting, and they just found a way. Miguel Rojas, a guy that's been around the league for a long time. Mets fans remember him most as the Marlins shortstop for years. And he proved the value of defense, which again is why, not that I think Jose Iglesias is going to hit a home run in the World Series for the Mets next year. Although, wouldn't that be awesome? But it is seeing a guy like Miguel Rojas have that type of an impact that makes me wonder about the presence of a glue guy on a roster. Kike Hernandez, not the best regular season player, awesome in October. And those are the guys that made some of the biggest plays for the Dodgers down the stretch. And now this team has won back-to-back World Series titles. And just like I talked about when they, beat up the Brewers, and I talked about how dominant the Dodgers are and how this is their league right now, and how that's the team you have to knock off the mountain. They're still there. The Blue Jays gave them a real push, but the Dodgers are still atop the mountain. I want to talk about that to close out the show here. And we'll kind of start to look at the offseason now. It's official. Free agency opens up. It's 5 days to negotiate with Edwin Diaz and get a deal done before it hits the market again, potentially. So we're going to talk about what it now means for the Dodgers to be in this position, and how the Mets try to be the team that does knock them off that mountain next season. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season's here, and FanDuel is an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, you put down $5. If it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. If you're watching that World Series and you were thinking the Dodgers were to come back into it, you could have gotten them in-game and maybe made some money, and it makes watching football, basketball, whatever you're watching even more exciting. We got a little something right on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sunday. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Nets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. You can take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. The Dodgers are going to go into next season trying to make a little bit of history. They want to be the first team to go back since the Yankees in 2000. Funny thing is, they went into this past season wanting to be the first team to go back-to-back since the Yankees in 2000. That's because the Yankees won 3 in a row from 1998 through 2000, and no team in the 21st century has won back-to-back titles since then. So now the Dodgers get to go out. They're probably going to load up again this offseason. Who knows what they do? Maybe they say, you know what? We like Miguel Rojas. Did a nice job for us. We like Tommy Edman, but he can play center field or he can move around the diamond. Let's sign Bo Bichette because we can. Who knows what the Dodgers do? They might do some crazy stuff. They might say, yeah, we got 4 aces. We got Roki Sasaki. They'll probably want to start again. But, why not get Dylan Cease too? We don't know what the Dodgers are going to pull off this offseason. But what we do know is when the season starts, they will be the favorite to win the World Series, and rightfully so. And there's probably not going to be any team that can catch them on paper. So how do you do it? I really think that it starts with changing the culture a little bit. The Mets have already kind of set the ball in motion there by bringing a whole new coaching staff into the mix. Seems like they might have their eyes on a new pitching coach. We'll talk about that this week if they do hire him. Another young guy, analytically minded, who was the director of pitching for the Red Sox, which means he worked with a big league club. I think it's Andrew Bailey who's their pitching coach, but also worked in the minor leagues. They have some pitching prospects that came up at the end of the season. Peyton Tolley, was it Connolly Ely or something? Regardless, it doesn't matter. He could be the pitching coach. And again, it sort of continues the trend of the Mets looking to more analytically driven coaches. And if you think, that's not the way to go about it, that Blue Jays lineup that nearly won the World Series, they have a drive line guy as their hitting coach right now. So analytics are not something to be afraid of. It's cool the Mets are leaning into it. They're getting some new voices into that clubhouse. They're going to try to coach up their players better, and hopefully that works. But again, I really do think that beyond just the same things that we've been talking about week over week over week since the Mets season ended, which is Pete Alonso, Edwin Diaz, and an ace, primarily, while those things are important, while those things are still the central themes of this offseason, I still think those are the 3 most important things for the New York Mets is to either re-sign or replace Diaz and Alonso and get a new ace. They got to figure out the other pieces that will make this a team. I think that's my biggest takeaway because the Dodgers had that and the Blue Jays had that. Even, to a certain extent, the Mariners had a little bit of that, right? You have to find a way throughout the season to foster that winning culture. Mets couldn't do it this year. They just felt disconnected all season, and ultimately they came up short. Now, I'm sure guys in the clubhouse might deny that they were disconnected, but it wasn't. You could just tell. And part of it is winning, right? The 2024 Mets had the inverse season of the 2025 Mets. 2025 Mets get off to a great start, and then that great start sort of buoyed them all year until they eventually sunk. The difference was in 2024, it was a horrendous start, and then they came on strong. So obviously, our lasting memory of the 2024 Mets is going to be a much more cohesive team because they were winning, but it's chicken and egg situation there. What came first, the clubhouse culture or the winning? Did the winning create the clubhouse culture? And it probably is a little bit of both, but I think the Mets have to ask themselves some tough questions this offseason. Last year, when they went through the offseason, they ran it back in some ways. They brought back Pete Alonso. They brought back Jesse Winker. They brought back Ryan Stanek. Maybe they brought back the wrong components of their team. You can make a case that Phil Maton can't make a case. You can just say the Mets screwed up by not picking up Phil Maton's option, which was a little over $7 million, or maybe it was $7.75 million. But they could have had Phil Maton back, and they chose, based on the postseason, to bring back Stanek. Stanek was awful, ERA over 5. Maton had ERA under 3. The Mets decided not to bring back Jose Iglesias or JD Martinez. I think it was a fair call on their part to do that. Jose Iglesias had a bad season. Nobody signed JD Martinez, but those voices maybe were missed. So again, I hate that my biggest takeaway from the Dodgers winning back-to-back World Series is the Mets need Iggy back, and they need to just get Jose Iglesias and run back OMG. But I don't think that's the end-all, be-all. I just think they need to find the right veterans. And maybe he's not the right veteran because he's not a very good hitter anymore, and he's 6 years old, however old Jose Iglesias is. But they need to find the veteran that can be their George Springer. Maybe not hitting to that level, but find the guy that can really be the leader in that clubhouse or be a leader in that clubhouse. Starling Marte, I think, was sort of that guy this year, and Juan Soto definitely gravitated towards him. But I don't know what the Mets are going to do. They have to figure that part of it out. I think that's one of the things I've neglected to really cover on this show since the season ended, because all the other roster management stuff always comes top to mind. But building that team identity is important. And so we'll see what the Mets do. It was an incredibly fun postseason. It sucked not watching the Mets, although it was great watching the Phillies lose early. That was the one thing I was rooting for. Once the playoffs began, I was all right, let's just not see the Phillies win the World Series. That was cool once that happened and the Yankees were out too. It was like, all right, who cares? I didn't really have a dog in the fight throughout the World Series. I didn't. Obviously, it's always fun to root for the underdog, but it's crazy because especially when the series eventually turned into the Blue Jays' favor when they went up 3-2, it felt like the Dodgers somehow in a weird way became the underdog because the Blue Jays really did feel like the better team in that World Series. Like, I think the Blue Jays played better and the Dodgers just threw a heroic performance really by Yoshinobu Yamamoto, because again, he wins 3 of the 4 games of the World Series for the Dodgers. The only game that he doesn't win being the 18-inning marathon. I mean, that just shows you the impact that Yoshinobu Yamamoto had. But it's pretty remarkable that the Dodgers were able to pull that off because the Blue Jays were better. They really were better in that series. I think if you play that series, 100 times, the Dodgers probably win, I don't know, 90 of them. Who knows? Because I think they would have played much better series if you play it over and over again, right? If you run through a simulation, those pitchers for the Dodgers and some of the hitters that they have in that lineup, you'd think that they would have been able to handle the Blue Jays, but the Blue Jays gave them a run for their money. And man, I feel awful for that fan base because they have a pretty, what was it, 1993? Have a pretty long World Series drought themselves that nearly ended. And I don't think there's any guarantee the Blue Jays are going to be right back next year. It does make them a pretty interesting team this offseason, though, because they're going to have money to spend and they're going to be a very attractive free agent destination. So it's going to be an exciting offseason. There's now a 5-day window. I'm recording this past midnight on November 2nd. You got the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. Try to sign Pete Alonso or Edwin Diaz before they become an official free agent. Not sure if that negotiation window will be taken advantage of or not. It was the last time Edwin Diaz hit the market, so we will see. And the Mets are going to probably make some more coaching hires over the next couple days as well. I think sounds like they might have a pitching coach, but they just didn't want to announce because the World Series was happening. So we'll see if that ends up being announced over the next couple days. And of course, I'll be talking about that on the show and plenty of other offseason topics as we now get into the fun part, which is baseball is over for everyone, which means the news can start to trickle in and free agency will pick up at some point. The winter meetings will be here before we know it, and we'll get to see how the Mets are going to remake this roster for 2026. I'm looking forward to being along for the ride and giving you guys shows throughout the entire offseason. I'll be doing 5 days a week and reacting to any news when it happens. And knowing me, there's always a chance that I might record on a Saturday, even without news. For example, whenever I get to finalizing my top 20 Mets prospects, I'm going to roll that out over 2 or 3 shows, which might start on Friday. So you're going to have plenty of Mets content throughout the offseason. Really do appreciate all of you who have tuned in throughout this year, been tuning in all offseason long, and will keep tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets.